نبدأ بأول محاضراتنا مع سينثيا مورينو توهي، المدير الجمعية الوطنية لمشيري الإدمان والتعاطي، وهي الجمعية التي تضم 100,000 مشير للإدمان والتعاطي، وتعمل في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، ولكن تغطي جميع أنحاء العالم لتقدم لكم تطور مهنة مشير الإدمان عبر السنين وعبر العالم. نقدم تحية لضيفتنا العزيزة سينثيا مورينو.
So, we're going to be talking about the addiction counselor profession and the global perspective of credentialing and licensing. So NAADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals, was founded in 1972 as the National Association of Alcoholism Counselors and Trainers. What we knew is that people needed to be trained to work in this new profession. So back then, it was called a new profession or a new discipline, just as social work, mental health, other professions started many years before that. We started as peer treatment and recovery organization at that time. So we weren't developed yet, we were just very young in the professional world. And then we worked with what's called the National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse to create competencies. In other words, what does it take to do this work? What is it that people need to know in order to work with someone with addiction? And back then it was alcoholism pretty much discussed. And so we did research, or they did research, I wasn't part of it back then, but they did research to discover what are the skills, what are the competencies, and what are the attitudes that you need to have. Attitude is very important, because if you don't have an attitude to work with people who have addiction, if you're judgmental or you see it as a moral issue, then you will not be as effective with that client. So it was important to establish competencies. So after that point in time, we needed to certify, we needed to have a way to test people and to be able to find out, do you have in fact the competencies that you need in order to treat people? And so we started a certification system. A certification system endorses your ability to treat. In other words, if it's like licensing, if you don't have a way to certify that someone has that knowledge and that skill, then you're not being able to endorse their opportunity. So in 1990, the certification board was established, and it is autonomous. In other words, it's separate than the membership organization. NAADAC is a membership organization that teaches and trains and advocates on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. These are some of the things that we do. Certification is very different. It's all about understanding someone's competencies. It provides evaluation mechanisms for measuring and monitoring the knowledge that somebody has. And it is a formal recognition. So in the United States, it became formal in recognizing that addiction is a profession, a discipline, a true discipline, and that federal money could be applied for people to learn to become addiction counselors. So that was a big deal, a big step forward in the United States, because before that, people really looked at doing this work not very popular. It wasn't very popular. And not only were people who had addiction not seen as popular, the people who treated them were not seen as popular. So we had to change attitudes about even the people who served people with addiction. So we worked with the federal government to develop a career ladder. So what are the different ways that someone can become a counselor? Where is no wrong door to come into the field? And how do you progress if you want to progress in the field? So we started with high school diplomas or GEDs and said, okay, this person can become an entry-level substance use person or counselor. So they can become a specialist. They can work as a peer. They can work in court diversion programs, jail programs. They can work as a peer navigator, like in hospitals or in other agencies. They can advocate and they can educate and they can become a coach. And so their scope of practice, so you see scope of practice is much shorter and much more contained in terms of what they can do. Not counseling, so they still have ethical responsibilities, they still have documentation responsibilities, they work to motivate and navigate with someone. And so that credential is recognized in the United States as a separate credential. Shortly, I'll be talking about how we're moving that globally. So we're moving from certification in the United States to certification around the world and using a similar, not necessarily exactly, career ladder. Then we have people who go through a certificate program, 1 year, 2 year program to become educated in substance use disorder. And there's certain domains that they study, and we'll be talking about those. We also have people who have a 2-year degree or an associate level degree. They have a larger scope of practice. They can counsel people, they can assess, evaluate, and treat people. The next career piece is bachelor's degree. So we have people with bachelor's degree who can supervise, who can also counsel, who can educate, and who can serve treatment programs. We move on to master's and doctorate. So in the United States, the certification board now is doing the clinical psychologist certificates program. So people that want to show that they have addiction studies as a psychologist goes through a special training on substance use disorder, and then they can test for their knowledge in substance use disorder and become certified. So global addiction. We have global addiction, do we not? Do you know a country that does not have addiction? No. Every country in the world now has addictive disorders as part of what's happening in their country. It has broken through. World Health Organization calls it a worldwide problem. It's a pandemic similar to COVID in that it has reached millions and millions of people. What does that mean? That means we need to work to have recovery, global recovery, global programs to help people get into recovery, global treatment, global career ladders, so people have the opportunity to get into recovery. It needs now to be global. So I congratulate you that you're doing this here in Kuwait. And for 20 years, I've been very blessed to work with Dr. Ehab and Dr. Nanis in Cairo, in Egypt, doing training and certification in Egypt. So we need to look at recovery from addictive disorders for individuals, the individual people that have addictive disorders, to their family members, because addiction touches everyone in the family. This film that you saw earlier today and yesterday, it shows how addiction touches everyone in the family. So it's not just the person who has the disorder for substance use. It's a brain disease, right? We know that. It's not just that person. It's all the family members. So if that person goes into recovery and the family doesn't get service, they don't get treatment, then we cannot expect the same result of recovery for the family. So not only does the individual need treatment, the family members need treatment. And we need a global worldview from our leaders to understand that addiction is happening, it's here, it's going to continue to grow if we don't do things to help support recovery. Recovery is possible. Prevention, intervention, and treatment works. We know that now. The research indicates that. And now we need to set that up in every country. It is a national security issue. If you think about all of the issues around addiction and how it affects just the workplace, in the United States, $400 billion are lost every year for loss of productivity or other issues on the job as a result of substance use disorder. That's a lot of money to be lost if you just think about money, but think about the humanistic side of that. Think about the people who are suffering as a result of their addictive disorder and the families and how that affects the structure of the community. So it's individual, it's family, and it's community. And we need to address all of those issues in substance use. So country strategies, global strategies. One of the things, I was just on Capitol Hill last week advocating and talking about what we need to do in terms of a national strategy. Do we have a national strategy for addictive disorders in America? We have one from the White House, but we don't have one that is employed on a regular basis. So we have ideas, we have models, but if you have a model and it's not employed, it's not used, it doesn't really address the issue. So we have to take the time to address the issue. I'm pretty passionate about this because I come from a family of addiction, and addiction affected my family very harshly, and it caused me to want to do this work. I wanted to become a social worker to help families like mine to move into recovery, but there were very little programs and very little support for that. Now we see much more support today. So we want to create qualified, trained, and supported individuals to do this work. So I can go get the education, I can get the training, but if I don't have the supervision to help me understand the complexity of the disease, then I'm not going to get what I need. This is a very complex disease. This is not like any other disease because it's biological. We know that because it affects the brain. It's sociological. It affects the society, the individual person, and the society at large. It's psychological. There's emotional impacts, and emotional impacts in the brain as well. And then it's spiritual. It affects the spirit of that person. It affects their ability to connect with others. It affects their ability to connect with themselves. So part of recovery is really recovering in all those aspects. It's recovering nutritionally, environmentally, family, job, money, finances, how you live your life. So it becomes a lifestyle. Recovery is not a technique, it's a lifestyle. And so that's what addiction counselors teach, is how to have this lifestyle of recovery. So what's our greatest need in the world? An addiction workforce. People who really understand addiction and can work in addiction. That's what we really need. We need to develop that from country to country and from leadership, government leadership to government leadership, so that we don't have the devastation that we're seeing in countries right now. We're seeing addiction kind of taking over society. So there's a big demand for addiction counselors in the United States. We need 24% more addiction counselors than what we have. Come to the United States, come be an addiction counselor. I need you. But it's not just in the United States, it's all over the world we need people. So currently we don't have the addiction workforce. We have to access more people, and we have to access other disciplines in order to help raise that workforce. So the integrity of the workforce, it's important that the training is specific so that people understand that. So I'm a social worker, I'm an addiction specialist, I'm an adolescent specialist. So you can add on other specialties as a social worker or as a clinical psychologist or as a professional in the field. You can add other endorsements to what you do. So NAADAC developed core modules for addiction workforce training It's called the Basics of Addiction Practice. And we developed that for the US government, the International Law and Drug Enforcement Division of the US government. And then we began to teach that. So our first pilot was in 2008 in Kenya. So we got to work with the Kenyan government to teach and then to set up certification in that country so that they could begin to deal with the addiction issues in Kenya. So now we are going worldwide, and we are doing education, training, and certification across the globe. We're working in 22 different languages, so people can test in their own language so that it's culturally relevant and it's linguistically relevant to them. So we test at different levels, from level 1, which is the beginning knowledge level, to level 4, which is the most advanced knowledge level. People can test all around the globe now, and they can test in person or they can test online 24/7. So people can basically testing on demand. Education is one of those important things. We have education providers across the globe. Actually, Freedom is one of our education providers. It means that they do gold standard, oh look, you got gold this morning, gold standard quality treatment, quality education, quality information, and community supports. So that program is an important program so that you know that you're getting what you believe you're paying for. Now we work with the Global Center for Certification and Credentialing, which is actually a worldwide certification group that we do the testing in other countries through. And so this system of credentialing now is ran through not just the US government, but governments across the whole globe are part of this global credentialing body. And this global credentialing body just met actually last May in Abu Dhabi. And one of the things that we talked about was how do we continue to spread the news and grow more addiction-specific counselors across the globe. So currently we have 16 different languages. By the end of this year, we'll have 22 different languages. And we're working in the United States and other countries to get it recognized by that government so that payment is made to the individuals and to the agencies that provide that service or those counselors. So in the United States, our credentials are recognized and used, and our tests are used in 43 out of 50 states in the United States, which is very unusual for a discipline to be able to reach all the states in terms of a certification system. We're moving towards what we call a compact. So there are international standards now for college courses. So colleges, universities that teach addiction studies, we now have international standards, and that just was completed late last year. So those standards are getting reviewed and then sent out to colleges and universities worldwide. There are not that many colleges that do addiction studies across the globe. In fact, when we did the literature review and the review of different colleges, we did not find that many colleges that do addiction studies. We need to have more of those across the globe. Standardized education is important. It protects the addiction counselor and it protects the public, making sure that people get what they need to have. The thing about education now is that it is portable, and we can do more education through telehealth. So I have this vision that we'll have a worldwide unified voice for addiction professionals, people who they may be peers, they may be beginning level counselors, they may be more advanced counselors or clinical psychs or psychs that all specialize in addiction, and they have a strong voice in society. And that voice is listened to and respected in society, because this is what's going to change the environment in community. So why addiction credentials? Well, it's important to have a standardized career ladder, again, because it protects the public, and you can measure outcomes. You can measure how well someone is doing and how well the clients that they serve are doing. It's also recognizable. So in the United States, we have different levels of credentials, from the peer recovery support specialist to the master's addiction counselor, which is master level or PhD, MD. And then we have what we call endorsements. So you can get a credential and then you can add to it. So you can add clinical supervision, adolescence, and nicotine. So we then, in the international world, we now have worked, oh, sorry, I left one out. I apologize. So we've started a new credential. And this new credential came about because we're working in the prison systems. So we're working in prisons to educate people that are incarcerated, men and women, to become addiction counselors. So while they're incarcerated, they're going through a 350-hour education process. Now they get educated and then we test them in the prison. When they get released, they can get their own credential. What's important about that credential is that gives them, or the agency that they work, the ability to be paid. And so this new credential has been rolled out now in line in prison programs, and we're soon to take it to other programs across the United States. So it's a new credential. The reason why it's not a full credential is because the people don't yet have the experiential hours. So in some countries, you have to have 2,000 hours experience before you can become certified. In other countries, it's 4,000 hours. And in some countries, it's 6,000 hours. So it depends on the country, how many hours they believe someone needs to have the experience before they can actually have the credential. It's to make sure it's quality, to make sure that people actually have the skills to do the work. As I said, addiction counseling is very complex. I used to think, oh, this is easy. I come from a family of addiction. I know addiction. I too am in recovery. I know addiction. I have studied addiction for years and years. I have worked in street programs to hospital programs, from detox to inpatient, to adolescents to older adults. I'm ADHD, I have to work everything, right? I want to work every program, every type of program. But even with that background, even with that education, the complexity of addiction took me years to understand internally and to really understand how it affects the person and the family. So it's not an easy breezy disease. So now the international credentialing that we have, we've taken some of the tests that we already had and we've made them international. So we've took out the Americanized questions and really spent time looking at what are the basic domains, what are the things you need to know to do this work. And we created a basic level international credential, a level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all the way through. The domains that people need to understand in order to become an addiction counselor start with treatment, intake, screening, and assessment. How do you assess someone for addictive disorders? Clinical assessment, ongoing treatment planning, counseling services, learning how to do individual, group, family, crisis intervention, and client education. Documentation, which everybody dislikes. Most people dislike documentation. You can't get away without it, though. Case management, discharge and continuing care, legal and ethical professional growth issues. So what I talked about yesterday in terms of ethics, everyone has to understand what are professional ethics when you work with this community of people. And pharmacology and physiology. As Dr. Mancini talked about yesterday, addiction is a brain disease. Understanding how it affects the brain, understanding those neural pathways because the neural pathways are going to still be in the brain. However, how do you change those neural pathways to become stronger around the life skills and the recovery skills for long-term recovery? And that's what we want to see, long-term recovery. We want people's brains to change and those neural pathways to change toward a lifestyle of recovery. So we work with a testing company to provide the tests. I'm not going to go into all these elements. There's a lot of different elements to testing. If you're really interested, come see me. But you don't really want me to go through that right now. And this is the process. So it's a very long, arduous process to create a test. It's not an overnight success. So each test that we create costs, through the testing company to develop, because of the process that it involves, costs about $100,000 to $150,000 per test. So it's an expensive proposition to create tests, and we've created 13 different tests in order to test different levels and also different types. So as you heard yesterday, we have a code of ethics that supports the profession. It's important to have a code of ethics, and so that is the structure that we use. And when we work in other countries, we work with what would be their code of ethics that's culturally specific. So it's not the Americanized code of ethics. It's what is your code of ethics? What does your code of ethics need to look like and take into consideration? So one of the things that we also learned is that we needed to teach what we want people to learn. And so NAADAC started doing webinar trainings probably 10 years ago. And that was to begin to train people 24/7. So they had 24/7 access. So our international partners could get the education as well as our United States base. So we have about 330 hours of education right now online. And we have specialty series like how to work with veterans and military, because as the military here and the police know here, you have certain stressors, right? It's not the same job as what I have. You have certain different culture in the military or in the police department. So really understanding that, if I'm going to work with you, I need to understand that. I need to think about that and apply that knowledge to my work with you. If I'm working with adolescents or young children, I need to understand the dynamics of adolescent brain and adolescent behavior. And I can't treat an adolescent the same way as I treat an adult. So it's important to learn those skills. So we teach those skills. So as I said, Dr. Ehab will be at our annual conference in Denver. He'll be speaking, and he'll also be talking about international credentialing. There we'll have plenary sessions, much like we've had here, as well as breakouts. And we'll have other conference abilities as well. So what am I looking for in the future? What are we looking toward? Okay, Dr. Ehab, I'm saying it. We're looking for an Arab-specific certification board so that we're able to work together to bring certification to the Arab world, which we have been doing in Egypt for how many years? 15? 22. Oh, no. I can't be 22. I'm not that old. It's got to be 15. You have to have a sense of humor when you work in this field, right? You got to have a sense of humor because that's how you last. That's how you keep going. So we're going to create an Arab-specific certification board, and we'll be talking about that. We're creating 3 levels of tier certification, peer-tiered certification. So core level, advanced level, and peer supervision. We're on track for launching a tracking tool for supervision. So I ran treatment agencies. I had 77 counselors, and each of those counselors, you have to track their professional development, their education, their training, that they have completed the things that they're supposed to complete. Doing that manually is a pain. So we've been working with a company to develop a electronic system for that, and that actually is launching through NAADAC shortly. And then a directory on the NAADAC website so that we can have a directory of what countries are doing training, testing, and certification. Currently, we have it for training, not for certification. So we'll be moving toward that in the near future. It's pretty exciting. And let me end here. Any questions that someone would have? Yes, please. Microphone, please. Not to cause you not to come down.
Does the United Nations or the World Health Organization have any participation or involvement in the policies and programs?
That's a very good question. So Dr. Ihab and I had written a proposal to the United Nations drug control policy 16 years ago, maybe, because this is a world issue. And they were interested in it. However, the person moved and did not pick up. No one picked that back up. Do you want to add?
احنا شاركنا كمان في وضع سياسات الإدمان من خلال مكتب الأمم المتحدة لمكافحة المخدرات والجريمة والبرنامج الإنمائي للأمم المتحدة. كان في مؤتمر كبير من حوالي 10-12 سنة في فيينا، وتم وضع خطة عالمية وكنا مشاركين فيها. فطبعا كل مش بس الجمعية الوطنية لمشير الإدمان والتعاطي والبرامج المختلفة كلها بتصب في يعني منصات عالمية إن شئت.
Right. So that's likely to continue, that we'll participate at those levels. It continues to be something that I think every country has to push for the United Nations to really declare it as a global pandemic. So the World Health Organization has determined that it is a global pandemic. We need to have other large groups understand that as well. Thank you for your question. Other questions?
عفوا دكتور إيهاب، بالتعاون مع ناداك ممكن ناخد فكرة عن طبيعة الشهادات اللي هتمنح للمنتظمين في ورش العمل، وكذلك الليفلز الممكنة في الأوقات القادمة؟ يعني المرة دي هناخد شهادة تؤهل لإيه، وهل اللي حاصل على شهادة ممكن يلتحق بحاجة أونلاين فيخوض إلى ليفل أعلى؟ عايز تقسيمة واضحة إن تفضلتم بهذا الموضوع.
يعني كل اللي هيحضر المؤتمر ممكن ويسجل الغياب في ورش العمل. في الجلسات العامة هنعتبر كل اللي بيتقدم بالحضور حاضر. هياخد ما يسمى وحدات التعلم المستمر. فالمؤتمر هيخرج منه أظن 20 ساعة من وحدات التعلم المستمر أو أكتر. عشان تكون حاصل على المستوى الأول من الترخيص تحتاج 200 ساعة، المستوى الأكثر تقدما 360 ساعة. ده اعتماد للشهادة. عشان تعمل ممارسة تحتاج إنه تمارس 2000 ساعة، يعني حوالي سنة، جزء من الوقت أو كل الوقت في مكان تعترف به الجهات اللي هتمنحك الشهادة. لكن احنا عندنا بالتعاون مع نيدك دراسات دبلومة إلكترونية، ولو في اقتراح ان احنا نعمل دبلومة في الكويت، احنا بنعمل دراسات على الأرض في جدة وفي الرياض، فممكن نعمل الدبلومة دي أيضا في الكويت. حيث ان انا خدت الميكروفون جاءني توصيتين باقتراحين. الاقتراح الأول هو تأسيس الجمعية الإقليمية العربية لمشيري الإدمان والتعاطي، Arab Regional Association for Addiction Counselors ARAC، ويكون مقرها مدينة الكويت. اللي موافق على الاقتراح ده يرفع ايده.
I understood that. I understood that.
والاقتراح الثاني المجلس الإقليمي العربي لتعزيز تراخيص الإدمان، Arab Council for Facilitating Addiction Credentialing معات، ويكون برضو مقره مدينة الكويت. اللي موافق يرفع ايده.
Yes, come down.
طيب
You have a question? Oh, okay.
أي سؤال تاني؟ شكرا جزيلا لسينثيا مورينو توي المناضلة القديمة في هذا المجال.